I'm Eleanor, 67 years old, and never imagined my daughter would throw me out. After Frank died, Barbara invited me to live with her family in Eugene. At first, helping with my grandchildren brought me joy, but over months tensions grew. That Tuesday morning still haunts me, Barbara storming into my room, flinging my old suitcase onto the bed, her face twisted with anger. "You're holding us back, Mom. Pack your things and move out." Those words shattered my heart. Before I share what led to this painful moment, please like and subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. Your support means everything during this difficult journey. My story begins long before that devastating morning. Frank and I shared 40 beautiful years together in our modest Portland home. He was my rock, my best friend. We'd built our life carefully, raising Barbara, teaching elementary school children, planning for retirement. We thought we had everything figured out. Then came Frank's diagnosis: cancer. Aggressive. The medical bills drained our savings despite insurance. When Frank passed away 18 months later, I found myself not just emotionally devastated, but financially vulnerable. Our Portland house, with its mortgage finally paid off just 5 years earlier, had to be sold to cover the remaining medical expenses. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone," Barbara said during those dark days after the funeral. "We have plenty of space. Come live with us in Eugene." Barbara had done well for herself. She married Robert, a financial analyst with a promising career. They had 2 wonderful children. Kaylee, 12, a serious student with her mother's determination, and Mason, 8, a ball of energy who reminded me so much of Barbara at that age. Their home in Eugene was spacious, a 4-bedroom craftsman with a beautiful garden I immediately fell in love with. "It makes perfect sense," Barbara insisted. "You can help with the kids and we'll take care of you." Those first months seemed like a blessing. I settled into the guest room that became Grandma's room, decorated with some of my treasured photographs and the quilt Frank's mother had made for our wedding. I found purpose in cooking family meals, helping Kaylee with her history projects, and teaching Mason to read. The children seemed to blossom with the extra attention, and I felt needed again. "Your chicken and dumplings are way better than Mom's," Mason would whisper to me, making me laugh while I pretended to scold him for the comparison. I contributed what I could financially, putting my teacher's pension toward household expenses, buying groceries, occasionally treating everyone to dinner out. It wasn't equal to what housing would cost on my own, but Barbara assured me that my help with the children was invaluable. "Do you know what childcare costs these days?" she'd say when I expressed concern about being a burden. "You're saving us thousands, Mom." But around the 6th month I began noticing subtle shifts. Barbara would rearrange the dishes I'd put away, claiming they were more accessible in different cabinets. Robert would make comments about the thermostat settings, reviewing the utility bills with pointed remarks about increased costs. Kaylee began responding to my suggestions with eye rolls and, "That's not how Mom does it." One evening, I overheard Barbara and Robert talking in their bedroom as I passed by on my way to the bathroom. "It's just temporary, right?" Robert was saying. "Until she gets back on her feet?" "Of course," Barbara replied, though I hadn't been aware of any timeline for my stay. "She just needs time." I retreated to my room that night with a heavy heart, wondering if I had misunderstood the arrangement. I began paying closer attention to the undercurrents in our daily interactions, noticing how Mason would sometimes say, "Grandma has too many rules," or how Barbara would subtly correct my interactions with the children. "We don't make Kaylee finish everything on her plate, Mom," she'd say quietly. "We're teaching intuitive eating." Each correction felt like a small paper cut, insignificant on its own, but increasingly painful as they accumulated. I began second-guessing myself, becoming more tentative in my role within the household. The confidence I'd felt as a mother, teacher, and grandmother began to erode, replaced by a growing sense that I was being merely tolerated rather than embraced as part of the family unit. Still, I reasoned with myself that multi-generational living requires adjustment. I tried to adapt, to be less visible while still being helpful. I just didn't realize then how quickly those paper cuts would become deep wounds, or how soon my daughter's invitation would transform into an eviction. The kitchen became our first real battlefield. I'd always expressed love through cooking my mother's recipes passed down through generations, comfort foods that had soothed Barbara through childhood illnesses and heartbreaks. But 6 months into my stay, Barbara began a health journey that put my cooking directly in the crosshairs. "Mom, all that butter and cream isn't good for anyone," she said one evening, watching me prepare my grandmother's potato soup. "We're trying to teach the kids about nutrition." The next day, I discovered she'd reorganized the entire kitchen. My baking supplies were relegated to a high shelf almost out of my reach. The cast iron skillets Frank had seasoned for me were stored in the garage, replaced with non-stick cookware. "We just needed to make space for the juicer and air fryer," Barbara explained with a tight smile when I asked about the changes. I felt the sting of being displaced from what had always been my domain. Cooking had been my contribution, my way of nurturing the family. Now even that role was being diminished. "Grandma, why does Mom say your food makes us sick?" Mason asked innocently one afternoon. My heart cracked a little more. Parenting differences became another source of growing tension. Barbara and Robert employed a permissive approach that contrasted sharply with how I'd raised Barbara. When Mason threw a tantrum over turning off his video game, I instinctively stepped in. "5 more minutes to finish up, then the game goes off, okay?" I said firmly but kindly. Later, Barbara cornered me in the laundry room. "Please don't undermine our parenting, Mom. We don't use time limits. We're teaching self-regulation." "He was screaming on the floor," I pointed out. "That's part of learning emotional expression," she countered. "We're raising children differently now." The implication stung that my methods were outdated, that perhaps I'd done a poor job with her. Soon after, I noticed Mason testing boundaries with me specifically, knowing his parents would rarely back up my requests. "Grandma can't tell me what to do," I overheard him telling Kaylee. "Mom says I don't have to listen if I'm not hurting anyone." My physical space in the house began shrinking too. First, some of my boxes from Portland were moved to the garage because they were cluttering the guest room closet. Then Barbara suggested I move my reading chair to make space for Kaylee's science project table. My photographs were relocated to make room for Robert's college sports memorabilia. "We need to set up a home office in part of your room," Barbara announced in early spring. "Robert's working from home 2 days a week now." A desk appeared in the corner of my bedroom. Soon Robert was there every Tuesday and Thursday, making business calls while I tried to make myself scarce. My bedroom had become a part-time workspace, and I found myself without true privacy for hours at a stretch. Financial discussions became increasingly uncomfortable. 9 months into my stay, Robert initiated a family budget review at dinner. "Utilities are up about 30% since last year," he noted, sliding a spreadsheet across the table. The implication was clear. I'd be happy to increase my contribution, I offered, though it would strain my limited income. "That would be fair," Robert nodded. "Or we could look at other arrangements if that's difficult." The following week, I took a part-time position at the Eugene Public Library. At 67, the hours on my feet were challenging, but I was determined to pull my weight. I increased my monthly contribution to the household by $400, stretching my teacher's pension to its limit. The holiday season brought matters to a head. Thanksgiving had always been my holiday, my turkey, my stuffing, my pumpkin pies. But when I mentioned starting my preparations, Barbara looked uncomfortable. "Actually, Mom, we're doing things differently this year. I've signed up for a prepared meal service. It's all organic, locally sourced. And we've invited Robert's colleagues, so we want to make a good impression." "I could still make my cranberry relish," I suggested, trying to find some small role. "The meal comes with everything," she said firmly. "Maybe next year." The Thanksgiving dinner was beautiful, Instagram perfect, and utterly devoid of the warmth and tradition I cherished. Robert's colleagues complimented Barbara effusively while I sat quietly, feeling like a stranger in what was supposed to be my home too. Kaylee's grandmother on Robert's side was treated as the honored guest, while I was introduced almost as an afterthought. "Oh, and my mother's living with us right now," Barbara said when someone asked about me. Right now. Those 2 words echoed in my mind throughout the meal. Not "my mother lives with us," but right now, temporary, conditional, subject to change. As Christmas approached, the distance between Barbara and me grew wider. The enthusiastic were family declarations of my early days had evolved into what felt increasingly like a landlord-tenant relationship, and a strained one at that. Little did I know that the new year would bring the confrontation that would change everything. January brought frigid temperatures to Oregon and an even colder atmosphere in our home. Robert received news of a significant promotion, and Barbara organized a celebratory dinner. The dining room was festive, the children dressed in their best clothes, and even I was encouraged to wear something nice for the occasion. To Robert, Barbara toasted, champagne flute held high. Senior investment director has a wonderful ring to it. Glasses clinked and Robert beamed. And to what this means for our family, he added. That home renovation we've been dreaming about can finally become reality. Can we really get the pool? Mason bounced in his seat. And my own bathroom? Kaylee added hopefully. We're going to create the perfect home, Barbara confirmed. Starting with converting the extra space into a proper home gym. The conversation continued with detailed plans for remodeling. It wasn't until I saw Kaylee glance uncomfortably in my direction that I realized the extra space they referred to included my bedroom. Later that evening, after the children went to bed, Barbara and Robert asked me to join them in the living room. Barbara had a folder of printouts, which she placed on the coffee table between us. Mom, we need to discuss some new arrangements, she began, her voice shifting into what I recognized as her professional tone. With Robert's promotion, we're ready to make some important changes to the house. I've been researching housing alternatives for seniors, Robert continued smoothly, sliding a brochure toward me. Willow Creek Senior Apartments has excellent amenities, and there's a shuttle service to downtown. I stared at the brochure showing a generic apartment complex with artificial-looking seniors playing cards in a community room. My hands trembled slightly as I processed what was happening. You want me to move out? My voice sounded distant even to myself. It's not about wanting you to leave, Barbara said, though her tone conveyed otherwise. It's about what's best for everyone. You'd have your independence back. Independence? I echoed. Barbara, I moved in because I couldn't afford independence after paying your father's medical bills. And we've given you time to recover, Robert interjected. It's been over a year. I've been contributing financially, I reminded them. I took a job to increase my contribution. I help with the children. Yes, and we appreciate that, Barbara said in a tone that suggested the opposite. But the children are getting older. They need space to develop without additional influences. The phrase stung like a slap. Additional influences? I'm their grandmother, not some random boarder. Barbara's professional demeanor began to crack. Mom, your ideas about raising children are outdated. You're constantly undermining our parenting decisions. Mason's therapist says he's confused by the conflicting messages. Mason has a therapist? This was the first I'd heard of it. For his anxiety, Barbara stated as if I should have known. Which gets worse when there's tension in the house. I didn't realize I was causing tension, I said carefully, though the accusation pierced deeply. It's not just that, Barbara continued, her voice rising slightly. It's everything. The way you sigh when I serve kale smoothies. How you slip Mason cookies when you think I'm not looking. The comments about how things were better in your day. I'm trying to adapt to your ways, I defended myself. But this is still new to me. That's exactly it, Mom. Everything is always about your adjustment, your feelings, your loss. Barbara's composure was fully cracking now. It's always been about you. My entire childhood was about your needs, your career, your preferences. I recoiled at the unexpected attack. What are you talking about? Everything your father and I did was for you. No. Everything was about your idea of what my life should be. Now you're doing the same thing with my children, my home. Robert shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing as years of apparently buried resentment poured out of my daughter. Do you know how many school events you missed because of your precious teaching job? How many times Dad had to be both parents because you were too busy with other people's children? Each accusation felt like a physical blow. These were grievances I'd never heard before. Complaints about a past I remembered very differently. Barbara, I worked so we could give you opportunities, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. We couldn't have afforded your dance lessons, Your college tuition otherwise. I would have preferred a mother who was present, she shot back. And now you're trying to take over with my kids to make up for what you didn't give me. The conversation spiraled further, with Robert occasionally trying to steer us back to the topic of my relocation, while Barbara continued excavating perceived injustices from decades past. The children, awakened by the raised voices, appeared at the top of the stairs, wide-eyed and frightened. Go back to bed, Robert called up to them, his tone gentle but firm. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Barbara hissed. Family discord because you can't accept that this is temporary. It was always meant to be temporary. That's not what you said when you invited me, I replied, my voice quavering. You said come live with us, not stay until we decide we've had enough. Barbara pushed back from the table abruptly and stormed upstairs. I heard her rummaging in the attic access above the hallway, then her footsteps pounding back down. She appeared in the living room doorway with my old battered suitcase, the one Frank and I had used on our honeymoon, stored away as a keepsake. Here, she said, flinging it onto the coffee table, sending the senior living brochure scattering. You're holding us back, Mom. Pack your things and move out. The room fell silent except for Mason's audible gasp from the stairway. Barbara stood there, chest heaving, a stranger wearing my daughter's face. Robert looked mortified but remained silent, and I sat frozen, staring at the suitcase that had once carried hopes for a new beginning, now representing the end of what I'd thought was my safe harbor. I don't remember leaving the living room. Somehow I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed, the bed in the room that would soon become a home gym, staring blankly at the wall. The suitcase lay where I'd dropped it, a physical manifestation of my new reality. Sleep eluded me that night. I moved between shock, grief, and periods of frantic mental calculation. Where could I go? What could I afford? How had my relationship with my only child deteriorated to this point without me noticing? Around 3 a.m. I found myself looking through old photo albums I'd kept under the bed. Barbara as a gap-toothed first grader. Barbara in her graduation cap. Barbara dancing with Frank at her wedding. Had I really been the neglectful mother she described? The photos showed a smiling child, a seemingly happy family. Had it all been an illusion? Morning arrived with the awkward choreography of a family in crisis. Barbara left early for work without a word. Robert made breakfast for the children, his forced cheerfulness fooling no one. The children watched me with solemn eyes as I sipped my coffee in silence. Are you going away, Grandma? Mason finally asked, his lower lip trembling. We're figuring things out, I answered, unwilling to burden him with adult problems. Mom was really mad, Kaylee observed quietly. She says you don't respect her rules. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Grown-ups sometimes have complicated feelings, but I want you to know that I love you both very much, no matter what happens. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. Kids, time for school. The bus will be here soon. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, researching housing options with increasing despair. Eugene's rental market was tight, and prices had skyrocketed since I'd last lived independently. My teacher's pension, reduced by early retirement when Frank got sick, wouldn't cover even a modest one-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. I called Susan, my oldest friend who had moved to Salem after her own husband died. Eleanor, that's terrible, she gasped after I explained the situation. Can you come stay with me while you figure things out? The offer was tempting, but Salem was over an hour away. I don't want to be that far from the grandchildren, I admitted. Despite everything, I can't bear the thought of not seeing them regularly. What about a room rental? There are websites for that now. The thought of living with strangers at my age was daunting, but I dutifully created an account on a home-sharing platform and began scrolling through options. By afternoon, I'd found a small studio apartment in a converted garage about 2 miles from Barbara's house. The rent would consume nearly 70% of my monthly income, leaving precious little for food, medications, and other necessities. But it was clean, available immediately, and within occasional walking distance of my grandchildren if visits were permitted. I made an appointment to see it that afternoon, using the rideshare app Kaylee had installed on my phone months earlier. The landlady, a widow in her 70s named Judith, showed me the compact space with empathetic eyes. It's not much, she acknowledged, but it's private and quiet. I don't interfere with my tenants. The studio had a kitchenette, a bathroom with grab bars already installed, and just enough space for a bed and small sitting area. The single window overlooked Judith's well-tended garden. I'll take it, I said, writing a check for the deposit from my dwindling savings account. When can I move in? Whenever you're ready, dear. I'll have the lease for you to sign tomorrow. I returned to Barbara's house, resolve hardening with each passing minute. I would not be thrown away like outdated furniture. I would leave with dignity on my own terms. That evening, Barbara returned home late. The children were already in bed, and Robert was working in his home office. I heard her moving around the kitchen but chose to remain in my room, planning my exit. The next day was Saturday. Barbara announced at breakfast that they were taking the children to an indoor water park for the day. I declined the automatic invitation that good manners compelled her to extend. I have some errands to run, I said simply. Once they were gone, I began packing methodically. Clothes, toiletries, the few mementos I couldn't bear to leave behind: Frank's watch, our wedding album, the handmade quilts. I was ruthless about the rest, knowing my new home couldn't accommodate excess. In the quiet house, I wrote a letter. Not a bitter recrimination or a pitiful plea, but an honest expression of my feelings and a clear-eyed assessment of where we stood. Dear Barbara, it began. By the time you read this, I will have moved to my own place. Your words made it clear that my presence has become a burden, rather than a comfort to you. While the manner of your request was painful, perhaps you were right that this arrangement has run its course. I don't recognize the mother you described in your accusations. I worked hard to give you opportunities, and your father and I made the best decisions we knew how to make. If those decisions hurt you, I am truly sorry. That was never my intention. I found a small place nearby. I'm doing this not just because you asked me to leave, but because I now see that I need to rebuild my independence. I will always be available to Kaylee and Mason if they wish to see me. My door will remain open to you as well, when and if you're ready. With love, despite everything, Mom. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, took one last look around the home I'd shared for 15 months, and called for another rideshare. With 2 suitcases and a single box, I left the key Barbara had given me beside the letter and closed the door behind me. The studio apartment felt even smaller once my belongings were unpacked. A double bed consumed most of the main living space, with just enough room for a small table and single chair beside the window. The kitchenette consisted of a mini refrigerator, a 2-burner stovetop, and a microwave that had seen better days. The bathroom was functional but cramped, with a shower stall barely large enough to turn around in. After the rideshare driver helped bring in my luggage, I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the meager evidence of my 77 years on Earth. The silence was absolute. No children's laughter. No television from the family room. No sounds of dinner being prepared or homework being discussed. So this is the next chapter, I said aloud, my voice sounding strange in the empty room. That first night was the hardest. I made the bed with linens Judith had provided, arranged my toiletries in the bathroom, and placed Frank's photograph on the bedside table. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the enormity of starting over at my age. Financial reality hit hard in the following days. After paying the first month's rent and security deposit, my bank account was alarmingly depleted. I calculated and recalculated my budget, looking for places to cut already bare-bones expenses. I increased my hours at the library from 15 to 25 per week, though the additional standing aggravated my arthritis. The extra income helped, but not enough to create any meaningful cushion. I learned to shop at the discount grocery store to buy day-old bread, to make soups that could stretch for multiple meals. The most difficult adjustment was the silence. After months in a busy household, the quiet of my small studio felt oppressive. I found myself leaving the radio on even when I wasn't actively listening, just to have human voices in the room. 2 weeks passed with no word from Barbara or the children. I checked my phone obsessively, hoping for a text or missed call. Nothing. I drafted messages to the grandchildren several times but deleted them without sending, uncertain of my standing or whether Barbara would view direct contact as an overreach. Finally, on day 16, a text from Mason appeared. "Grandma, where are you? Mom says you moved but won't tell us where. I miss your cookies." My heart both soared and broke as I typed a careful reply. "I have my own place now, sweetheart. I miss you too. Very much. Can we visit?" came the immediate response. "You'd need to ask your mom first," I wrote back, anxious not to create additional conflict. The exchange, brief as it was, lifted my spirits tremendously. That evening I baked a small batch of chocolate chip cookies in my tiny oven, even with no one to share them with. As February progressed, the Pacific Northwest winter took its toll. Rain fell incessantly, and the walk to the bus stop for work left me chilled to the bone. One particularly miserable Tuesday, I returned home with a cough that worsened through the night. By morning I felt terrible, feverish, congested, exhausted. I called in sick to the library for the first time since starting work there, and spent the day drifting in and out of restless sleep. With no one to check on me or bring supplies, I subsisted on tea and the few crackers I had in the cupboard. On the second day of illness, a knock at my door roused me from a feverish doze. I shuffled across the room, expecting perhaps Judith checking on the unusual silence from my unit. Instead, I found my neighbor from 2 doors down, a woman in her 70s named Margaret, whom I'd greeted in passing but never really spoken with. "You haven't been out in 2 days, she said matter-of-factly. "In this community, that's cause for wellness check. You look awful, dear." Before I could protest, Margaret had bustled in with a container of homemade soup, cold medicine, and a box of tissues. "We look after each other here," she explained, filling a bowl for me. "I did the same for Judith last winter when she had that nasty flu." Margaret's unexpected kindness opened a door. As I recovered, she introduced me to other residents of our small complex, mostly older singles like myself, many also estranged from family or rebuilding after late-life divorces. We began sharing Sunday potluck dinners in the complex's modest common room, trading stories and advice about living independently on limited means. The community center 3 blocks away became another lifeline. For a nominal annual fee, I gained access to their senior programs, chair yoga classes that eased my arthritis, a book club that fed my love of literature, weekly card games that filled otherwise lonely evenings. My doctor expressed concern about my blood pressure during my regular checkup. "The stress of all these changes is taking a physical toll," she warned, adjusting my medication. "Are you sleeping well?" "Eating regularly." I admitted to struggling with both. The financial strain meant sometimes skipping meals to make ends meet. Sleep came in fractured segments, interrupted by worries about the future or dreams about the past. "You need to prioritize self-care," she advised. "Your health has to come first now." Taking her words to heart, I began creating small rituals to care for myself. Each morning started with gentle stretches by the window. I found peace in arranging the few decorative items I owned: a vase of inexpensive flowers, Frank's photograph, a small ceramic bird Kaylee had made me years earlier, to create a sense of home in my limited space. Susan visited from Salem one weekend, bringing homemade freezer meals and much-needed laughter. We stayed up late drinking tea at my little table, reminiscing about our teaching days and the children we'd guided over the decades. "You know," she said thoughtfully as our conversation turned to my situation with Barbara, "sometimes I think we expect too much from our children. We pour everything into raising them, and then we're surprised when they need to establish boundaries as adults." "But throwing me out wasn't establishing boundaries," I objected. "It was rejection." "True," Susan acknowledged. "The way she handled it was cruel. But maybe there's some truth mixed in with the cruelty. Maybe you both need this separation to redefine your relationship." Her perspective, while difficult to hear, planted a seed that would grow in importance over the coming weeks. The weekly calls with Susan became a stabilizing force, as did my friendships with Margaret and the other neighbors. Slowly, I began to see that family could be created as well as born, that connections formed in late life could be just as meaningful as blood ties. I took up painting again, a hobby abandoned during the busy years of teaching and parenting. The community center offered free art classes, and I discovered that my small studio with its northern light was actually ideal for watercolors. The focused attention required for painting provided respite from circular worries and regrets. 1 month stretched into 2. Winter grudgingly gave way to early spring. And still, no word from Barbara, though Mason occasionally sent text messages that I treasured like precious jewels. I existed in a strange limbo, not fully reconciled to my new solitary life, not completely separated from my old one. Then, on a rainy Sunday afternoon in late March, another knock came at my door. This one would change everything again. The knocking persisted, urgent and insistent. I set aside my book and peered through the peephole, then gasped. Mason and Kaylee stood on my doorstep, with Robert hovering awkwardly behind them. I threw open the door. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" Mason launched himself into my arms while Kaylee held back, attempting teenage dignity though her eyes revealed her emotion. "Mason tracked your location through the family sharing app," Robert explained, looking both embarrassed and relieved. "He's been planning this detective work for weeks. I thought it was time they saw you." I ushered them into my tiny space, suddenly self-conscious about its modest dimensions after the spaciousness of their home. Mason explored with unfiltered curiosity, while Kaylee took in everything with careful eyes. "It's small," she finally said. "But it's mine," I replied with more confidence than I felt. "Would anyone like tea? It's about all I can offer at the moment." While the children settled at my small table, Robert pulled me aside. "Eleanor, I want to apologize," he said quietly. "The way things happened, it wasn't right. Barbara was under tremendous pressure with the promotion, working 60-hour weeks. She wasn't herself." "She seemed very much herself," I countered. "Just a version I hadn't seen before." Robert sighed, running a hand through hair that seemed to have acquired more gray since I'd last seen him. "She's been seeing a therapist since you left. There are issues from her childhood she's working through. Things that came to a head when you were living with us. She made it clear how she feels about my mothering," I said, the hurt still fresh. "Barbara struggles with anxiety, has for years," Robert continued. "The pressure to be perfect mother, perfect wife, perfect executive, it's overwhelming her. In some ways, having you there made it worse because she was constantly comparing herself to you, feeling inadequate. This perspective was so at odds with my understanding of our relationship that I struggled to process it. Barbara felt inadequate compared to me? She's always felt she could never measure up to your standards," Robert explained. "And then seeing you with the kids, how naturally you connected with them. It triggered something deep." The kettle whistled, saving me from having to respond immediately. I busied myself preparing tea, mind racing with this new information. "The kids miss you terribly," Robert added as I arranged cookies on a plate store-bought, not homemade, another small concession to my new financial reality. "Mason asks about you every day. Barbara knows I brought them today. She's wondering if you might come for dinner next Sunday." The invitation hung in the air between us, weighted with unspoken complications. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect myself from further rejection. But looking at Mason and Kaylee eagerly exploring my small space, I couldn't deny them another connection. "I'll think about it," I finally said. We spent an hour together, the children filling me in on school projects and sports activities. When it was time to leave, Kaylee surprised me with a fierce hug. "I'm sorry Mom was mean," she whispered. "It's not your fault." I held her tight, recognizing the burden she'd been carrying. "Adult problems are never children's responsibility," I told her firmly. "Your mom and I will work things out." After they left, I sat in the sudden quiet of my apartment, turning the conversation with Robert over in my mind. Barbara's perspective was so different from my own experience that it felt like we'd lived in parallel universes. Had I been so blind to her feelings? Had she misinterpreted my intentions so completely? The following Sunday, I stood on the doorstep of the house I'd left 2 months earlier, a homemade apple pie in my hands and anxiety churning in my stomach. Robert answered, his relief evident. "Thank you for coming," he said, taking the pie. "The kids are excited." Mason and Kaylee greeted me warmly, but Barbara remained in the kitchen. When I finally entered that space, she was stirring something on the stove, her back to me, shoulders tense. "Hello, Barbara," I said softly. She turned slowly. Her face was thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes. "Mom," she acknowledged with a nod, neither warm nor cold. Dinner was an exercise in careful conversation. The children carried most of it, with Robert occasionally steering toward safe topics. Barbara said little, though I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. After dinner, the awkwardness threatened to overwhelm us all. Robert suggested the children show me their latest school projects, a transparent attempt to give Barbara and me some space. "I'll help with the dishes," I offered once they'd gone. Barbara looked like she might refuse, then nodded curtly. We worked in silence for several minutes, falling into the familiar rhythm we'd established during my months living there. "Your apartment looks nice," she finally said, not meeting my eyes. "It's adequate," I replied. "Small but manageable." More silence as she scraped plates and I loaded the dishwasher. "Robert says you're seeing a therapist," I ventured carefully. The serving spoon Barbara was holding clattered to the counter. "He had no right to tell you that. He's worried about you. We all are. I'm fine." Her tone made it clear the subject was closed. I tried another approach. "I've been thinking about what you said, about feeling I wasn't present enough when you were growing up." Barbara froze, hands submerged in soapy water. "I shouldn't have said those things. Maybe you needed to say them," I suggested gently. "Maybe I needed to hear them." She turned then, water dripping from her hands. "Do you know what my therapist thinks? She thinks I've spent my entire adult life trying to be the perfect mother to make up for feeling like I wasn't important enough as a child. That I resent you because no matter how hard I try, I never feel good enough." The pain in her voice cut through me. "Barbara, you were always enough. More than enough. Then why did your students always come first? Why was Dad the one who came to my recitals, my games? Why was he the one who took care of me when I was sick?" "Because he could," I said simply. "Because we made a choice together that my income would provide stability, opportunities. Your father was the one with the flexible schedule, so he took on more of the day-to-day parenting. It wasn't about loving you less." "It felt that way," she whispered, suddenly looking very young. "And then when you moved in, seeing how good you are with Kaylee and Mason, it was like you were giving them what you never gave me." "Oh, Barbara." I reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. "I'm their grandmother. Grandparenting is different from parenting. I'm not responsible for discipline or long-term decisions. I just get to love them." "You make it look so easy," she said, her voice breaking. "Everything I struggle with, patience, connection, it all seems effortless for you." "It wasn't effortless when you were growing up," I admitted. "I was learning as I went, just like you are now. And I made plenty of mistakes." Barbara wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. "I never meant for you to end up in that tiny apartment. When I saw it today, Mom, it's barely bigger than our bathroom." "It's what I can afford," I said simply. "I was horrible to you," she continued, guilt washing over her features. "The things I said, throwing that suitcase. I don't know who that person was." "She was someone under enormous pressure," I suggested, echoing Robert's words. "Someone trying to be everything to everyone." Barbara's carefully constructed composure finally crumbled. In the kitchen where she had once commanded with such authority, my daughter broke down in sobs. Without hesitation, I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as I hadn't done since she was a child. "I'm so sorry," she repeated between sobs. "I don't expect you to forgive me. What I did was unforgivable." "Nothing between mother and daughter is unforgivable," I told her, my own tears flowing freely now. "Difficult, painful, yes, but not unforgivable." Robert appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face, but I shook my head slightly, and he withdrew, giving us the privacy this moment demanded. Eventually, Barbara's sobs subsided. We sat at the kitchen table, emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter, the weight of unspoken resentments and misunderstandings finally addressed. "What happens now?" Barbara asked, looking uncertain in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager facing college decisions. "Now we begin again," I said. "Not as housemates, I think we've established that doesn't work for us, but as mother and daughter, finding a new way to be in each other's lives." "And the children? They miss you so much." "I miss them too. Perhaps we can establish regular visits, maybe a standing dinner date." Barbara nodded, then asked hesitantly, "Would you consider moving somewhere better?" We could help with the rent. That place isn't safe, Mom, and it's too isolated. I need to maintain my independence, I said firmly. But I've been thinking about the senior apartments you originally suggested. They're beyond my budget now, but perhaps with a little help initially, while I build my savings again. We talked into the evening, making tentative plans, establishing boundaries that felt respectful rather than rejecting. Nothing was fully resolved. Decades of misunderstanding couldn't be addressed in a single conversation. But we had made a beginning. When I finally prepared to leave, the entire family walked me to the door. Mason hugged me fiercely, making me promise to come back soon. Kaylee, in a gesture that brought tears to my eyes, asked if she could visit my apartment sometimes, just us girls. Barbara embraced me last, still somewhat tentative but genuine. I'm trying to be better, Mom, she whispered. For them, for me, for us. We both are, I assured her. That's all anyone can ask. As I stepped out into the evening air, I felt something shift inside me. Not the complete healing of our relationship, but the beginning of a transformation. The family stood in the doorway watching me leave, not with the frozen shock of my previous departure, but with the warm anticipation of my promised return. The journey back to wholeness isn't a straight line. In the months following that emotional Sunday dinner, Barbara and I navigated a new relationship with careful steps and occasional missteps. There were difficult conversations that ended in tears, uncomfortable silences, and moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But there was also growth, understanding, and a deepening connection based on honesty rather than expectation. I made the decision to remain in my small studio, at least for the first year. Despite Barbara and Robert's offers of financial assistance for better housing, I needed to prove to myself, and to them, that I could stand on my own. Independence, I discovered, was as much a state of mind as a living arrangement. Are you sure, Mom? Barbara asked when I declined their help with a security deposit on a larger apartment. We want to make things right. Making things right isn't about money or square footage, I explained. It's about respect and boundaries. I need to know I can take care of myself. She nodded slowly, beginning to understand this wasn't about pride but self-determination. We established a rhythm that worked for all of us. Sunday dinners at Barbara's house became a weekly tradition. One Saturday a month, the grandchildren visited my apartment, delighted by the cozy space that felt like a special hideaway to them. Kaylee helped me arrange my small collection of books and photographs, while Mason appointed himself my official fixer, always finding something that needed adjustment or repair. Grandma's house is cool, Mason announced after his first visit. It's like a tiny home show on TV. The community I'd begun building during my isolation continued to flourish. Margaret and my other neighbors became an extended family of choice. Barbara, initially uncomfortable with what she perceived as charity, gradually came to appreciate these connections. They're not replacing you, I assured her when she expressed concern about my growing friendships. They're adding to my life, just as your friends add to yours. My part-time work at the library brought unexpected fulfillment. What had begun as financial necessity became a source of joy as I organized the children's reading program, drawing on skills honed during decades of teaching. The modest income, combined with my pension, allowed me to gradually rebuild my savings. Barbara's therapy continued, and sometimes she shared insights that helped us both understand our complicated history. My therapist says I've been angry at you for not being perfect, she told me during one of our coffee dates, a new tradition just for the two of us. That I held you to an impossible standard and then resented you for not meeting it. No parent is perfect, I said. We all do our best with the knowledge and resources we have at the time. I'm starting to understand that, she admitted. Especially now that Kaylee is entering her teenage years. I hear myself saying things my therapist would call black and white thinking, and have to catch myself. My own growth continued as well. The art classes at the community center led to an unexpected opportunity, when the instructor encouraged me to submit work to a local senior artists exhibition. To my astonishment, 2 of my watercolors sold, and I was invited to teach a beginner's class. You found your second act, Mom, Barbara observed at the exhibition opening, genuine pride in her voice. Third act, maybe even fourth, I corrected with a smile. Life keeps offering new beginnings if we're brave enough to take them. As time passed, I began to recognize patterns in our family dynamics that stretched back generations. My own mother had been critical and emotionally distant, a product of her Depression-era upbringing where survival left little room for affection. I had sworn to be different with Barbara, focusing on providing opportunities and stability, but perhaps missing some of the emotional connection she craved. Barbara, in turn, had swung to the opposite extreme, trying to be the perfect, ever-present mother, placing impossible pressure on herself, and eventually resenting my presence as a perceived judgment on her parenting. "We're breaking the cycle," I told her one evening as we watched the children playing in the backyard. "Recognizing the patterns is the first step to changing them." "I hope so," she said softly. "I don't want Kaylee to feel she has to be perfect, or Mason to think his emotions are a problem to be managed." The relationship between Barbara and Robert strengthened as well. The crisis of my departure had forced conversations they'd been avoiding about their expectations, pressures, and needs. Robert reduced his work hours, taking a more active role in family life, while Barbara found better balance between her executive position and home responsibilities. My financial situation gradually stabilized. With careful budgeting and the additional income from art classes, I was able to create a small emergency fund and even begin setting aside money for future needs. The fear that had haunted me after Frank's death, of becoming destitute in my old age, began to recede. 6 months after our reconciliation, Barbara approached me with an idea that showed how far we'd come. "Mom, we've been thinking about converting the back garden shed into a small studio apartment," she said. "Nothing fancy, but it would have its own entrance, bathroom, and kitchenette. Would you consider moving into it? Not to be our live-in babysitter," she added quickly, "but to be closer to the family while still having your independence." I considered the offer carefully, appreciative of the thought behind it but wary of falling back into old patterns. "Let me think about it," I said. "It's a generous offer, but I want to make sure it's right for everyone." After discussing it with Susan, Margaret, and even my new friends from the community center, I made my decision. "I'd like to stay where I am for now," I told Barbara. "The apartment has become home, and my community there is important to me. But I deeply appreciate the offer and what it represents." Rather than disappointment, I saw understanding in her eyes. "You've built a life for yourself," she acknowledged. "We'll keep the option open if you ever change your mind." That conversation, more than anything, showed the growth in our relationship. Barbara could make an offer without expectation, and I could decline without fear of rejection. We had found the respectful balance that had eluded us before. As my 70th birthday approached, I reflected on the painful journey that had led to this new phase of life. The hurt of being told I was holding them back had transformed into the liberation of creating a life on my own terms. The suitcase thrown in anger had become a symbol not of rejection but of transition to a new chapter. The celebration Barbara organized for my birthday brought together all the strands of my reconfigured life: family, new friends, colleagues from the library and community center. As I looked around at the gathering in Barbara's backyard, I felt a sense of wholeness that had nothing to do with material comfort or conventional success. Life had not turned out as I'd expected. The secure retirement Frank and I had planned, the role of live-in grandmother I'd briefly occupied, these had given way to something different but equally meaningful. Independence had been forced upon me, but I had made it my own. When Barbara raised her glass to toast my birthday, her words brought tears to my eyes. "To my mother," she said, "who taught me that it's never too late to start over, to heal old wounds and to find new purpose. Your courage inspires us all." Later, as the party wound down, Mason tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, are you happy in your tiny house?" he asked with a child's directness. "I am," I answered truthfully. "It's not what I planned, but it's become exactly what I need." "Mom says sometimes the hardest things turn out to be the best things," he said, clearly repeating something he'd overheard. "Your mom is becoming very wise," I told him, catching Barbara's eye across the yard. She smiled and raised her glass slightly, an acknowledgement of how far we'd come. The truth is, families are complicated. Love doesn't prevent hurt. Sometimes it makes the hurt cut deeper. But love can also heal if we're brave enough to be honest, to set boundaries, To forgive without forgetting the lessons learned. My journey from that devastating moment. A suitcase thrown, cruel words spoken. To this place of peace wasn't simple or easy. There were days of loneliness so acute I could barely breathe, moments of doubt when I questioned every decision I'd ever made as a mother. But through it all, I discovered a resilience I never knew I possessed and built connections that enriched my life in unexpected ways. If you're facing a similar crossroads, family conflict, late life changes, the need to rebuild, know that there is hope on the other side of heartbreak. Your path forward may not look like the one you planned, but it can still lead to fulfillment and joy. Have you experienced family estrangement or had to start over later in life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible, even after the deepest wounds. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, it's never too late to write a new chapter in your story.